Okay, Revelation 13 is where we want to open our Bibles to for our Bible study this evening. Appreciate your joining us. If you're joining us by way of technology now or later, giving you a moment to find Revelation chapter 13. If my memory is correct, the Bible contains 1,189 chapters. Revelation 13 is for a lot of people their most favorite chapter of all. If my memory is correct, the Bible contains 31,102 verses. Revelation 13, 16 through 18, for a lot of people, are the three most favorite verses in the Bible. Why is that the case? What will those verses talk about? The mark of the beast and the number 666. You can't get folks to talk about worship or salvation or baptism or working for the Lord or living for the Lord, but buddy, all hands are on deck if you mention 666 and the mark of the beast. And the sad thing is, we might figure out who or what the mark of the beast is and still not be saved. And I don't mean to de-emphasize this chapter, but there's more to the Bible than this chapter. And there's something I think we want to keep in mind. We want to have a balance in our study. And we're going to do our best to cover chapter 13 tonight. We may not finish it all. If we don't, we'll make a few more comments next. Well, actually, it'll be this Sunday. I'll be teaching this Sunday. We'll either wrap up chapter 13 or get into chapter 14. Now, back in chapter 12, we talked about the dragon. Do you remember who the dragon is? We're told who the dragon is. Starts with a D. Devil. The dragon's the devil. No doubt about that. And we read about the struggle between the woman and the child and the dragon. The child being Christ. The woman, perhaps God's faithful people, the true Israel. Satan did not succeed in destroying the child. He did not succeed in destroying Christ. And so now he concentrates his efforts on destroying the seed. And that, of course, being the church. Those who are faithful, true Israel. Back in chapter 12, 17, and with these aren't on this isn't on the slides, Cat, so hang tight on that. But back in chapter 12, 17, the dragon or the devil was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, which is another way of saying Christians. The devil, again, not succeeding in destroying the Lord, turned his full fury on those who follow the Lord. And he could not destroy the church collectively, but he could destroy Christians individually. And of course, he increased the attacks and still attacks God's people today. Now in chapter 13, two agents of the devil are mentioned, two allies, you might say, that he uses to try to defeat the purposes and people of God. And these are in the form of two beasts. Again, this is figurative or symbolic language, as we saw as we introduced Revelation. But he speaks of a beast out of the sea, verses 1 through 10, and then the beast from the earth, verses 11 through 18. So let's start now, and I'll read verses 1 to 3 to get us started. John says, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. All right, keep in mind these are visions that John is seeing. And back up in verse 1, he's standing by the sea. And most of us love to do that, don't we? We like going to the ocean, standing there looking out, feeling the ocean breeze. Seems like there's always a breeze. Not this far north of Mississippi, but if you go to the coast, it seems like there's always a breeze. And no matter how hot it is, at least the breeze helps out. So we put our feet in the sand. We know the scene. But this would be a scene that would terrify us, to see something like this come out of the sea. This, and I've already noted, my understanding of Revelation is a description of the Roman Empire persecuting God's people even then. And that's going to be how I'm going to interpret chapter 13. Obviously, if you take a different approach, your interpretation is going to be different. And we've said we're not going to be what? Dogmatic. We're not going to be dogmatic because these are things, some of these things we just have to speculate. But I believe he's talking about, makes sense to me, he's talking about the threat they were facing then, else why bother writing to them about it? And they knew what John's talking about. So here's a beast. I mean, it is a beast, right? 7 heads and 10 horns. This is not literal, but obviously the more heads over something, the more authority, right? And horns represented power. Here's a beast with a lot of power, a lot of clout, a lot of authority is the idea. 10 crowns on those heads. Again, the idea of dominion, might, rule. Also upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Now we know the word blasphemy simply means to speak against. And here the blasphemy would be against God. Here is a force that has the audacity to speak against the God of heaven. And again, if we're right in interpreting this beast as Rome, keep in mind the Roman emperors claimed deity for themselves. And some of them demanded, "You call me master and God." That is blasphemy for a man to take on the title of God, to think that he is God. Domitian, one of the Roman rulers, required his subjects speak of him as Lord and God. So what was the Christian to do? There was the dilemma. If you didn't announce and bow to Rome, you were subject to death. So the dilemma is, do I want to save my neck and bow to Rome and call the ruler God? Or do I want to save my, what? Soul and confess Jesus is Lord? That was the dilemma then. Now for the faithful Christian, it's really not a dilemma, is it? This is what they're facing. Blasphemy. Notice in verse 2, he compares the beast to a leopard, having the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion. Those 3 animals, leopard, bear, and lion, are they shy, weak, timid creatures? If you say boo, they run off. These are powerful creatures, correct? Leopard is very fast. We know about a bear, and we know about a lion. You don't walk up to these animals and pat them on the head and say, "Good kitty cat," because you lose a hand or lose your life. These are ferocious beasts. This is a ferocious force, is the idea. And you may think about Daniel. You remember Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar had a vision, a great image. And it wasn't a great image as much as the parts of that image represented different kingdoms. And Daniel gave him the interpretation. That's Daniel 2, as well as Daniel chapter 7. But here, this particular beast represents one kingdom, I believe, to be the Roman kingdom that is savage, like the animals that he mentions here. And the dragon or the devil gave him, the beast, Rome, power and his seat and great authority. In other words, this evil empire was a pawn in the hands of the devil to try to bring about the downfall of the church. And I don't know exactly how the devil is able to do what he is able to do, but he does have tools at his disposal. Even at times kingdoms. When Jesus was tempted by the devil, remember that one of the temptations was, the devil said, I will give you all these if you'll fall down and worship me. All what? Kingdoms. I will give you all the kingdoms of the earth. Now, the question is, did the devil really have the right to do that? Well, if he didn't have the right, it wouldn't have been in temptation. So, the devil has a lot of tools at his disposal, and again, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but we do know that this empire was a tool that he's using to try to bring about, again, the downfall of Christians. Verse 3, I saw one of his heads, he had 7 in all, one of his heads received a wound that was almost fatal, as it were wounded to death. Now, when we say that Rome was a formidable force, we're not exaggerating, but there were times before Rome fell that she did receive some blows to the empire itself. One particular time when one of the heads, if this is correct, wounded to death, you may recall the name Nero. Nero was a Roman emperor, and he was vicious, very vicious. He died on June the 9th, 68 AD, he took his life. Nero took his life. He was a great persecutor of Christians. Some might have thought, well, with Nero gone, that would be the curtain to the Roman Empire. But as we know, not at all. It was a time of chaos and anarchy. But Vespasian came along, another Roman emperor, and he restored order. So one of the heads were wounded, as it were wounded to death, maybe the death of Nero, but his deadly wound was healed. That is, the empire did not crumble. Another came along and again set things in order. And then under the Roman Emperor Domitian, there was a great revival of persecution against Christians and the church. The text says, all the world wondered after the beast. They were amazed. If the beast be the Roman Empire, I mean, your mouth just gaped open in awe of its might, of its power, and amazed held the admiration of the world. People thought that Rome, like Babylon years earlier, they thought that Rome could not be what? Defeated. It was invincible in the minds of a lot of people. They are in awe of this beast or this force persecuting Christians. Notice beginning now in verse 4. They were so much in awe that they worshipped the dragon, which gave power to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, well, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war against the beast, of course, and survive the war? We know that there have always been and always will be people who literally worship the devil. I think the Satanic Church started in this country in California, where a lot of bad things start in California, I guess. That's just a joke, but literally, Anton LaVey started the Satanic Church in California, and there are literal Satanists who literally worship the devil. But folks, there are a lot of devil worshipers who would never admit to worshiping the devil, but they still worship the devil nonetheless. If you go out here and ask the average worldly person who has nothing for the Lord, do you worship the devil? He or she would say, well, absolutely not. When all the while they are. If they worship money, if they worship fame, if they worship fortune and things like that, if they worship lust, they're worshiping the devil by their lifestyle. And so here, These, because they give so much credence to Rome, in essence worship the one behind Rome, who is the devil, and may not have even realized it. But as we've said, these emperors were demanding people worship them and the state. And again, the question is asked in verse 4, who is like to the beast? Who's able to make war with him? Those very questions were asked of God back in Exodus 15. People were amazed at God. Who would be able to fight against God and win? No one. Well, they've gotten to the point now where they think this of Rome. Nobody could ever make war against Rome and win, the empire. Verse 5, there was given to him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given to him to continue 42 months. And so, here again is this power asserting itself against God, opposition against God. And notice, this power, though, is limited to how long? 42 months. We've heard this repeatedly, have we not? In previous chapters, this phrase 42 months, not to be taken literally, but 42 months gives you hope because there's light, what? At the end of the tunnel. If he said power was given to him forever and ever, well, there would have been no hope. But 42 months indicates a limited amount of time. It's not going to go on forever. Rome will fall. The enemy of God's people will eventually fall. But obviously not yet, as of John's time. Verse 6, he opened his mouth in blasphemy, speaking against God, the audacity of that. And everything connected with God. His tabernacle, his name, even those who were faithful that dwelt in heaven. Obviously, the empire could not touch those who had already died, those already in heaven, but it certainly was relentless in trying to harm those on earth. Verse 7, it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations, persecuting the very people of God. And again, if you look at verse 7, here's the one who had power over all kindreds, over all tongues, over all nations. People reading this in the first century had no doubt as who John was talking about. Who was it that had power over all kindreds, tongues, and nations? It was Rome. They were the world power at that time. Verse 8, all that dwell on the earth shall worship him. That is, those who are not Christians, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And so, people at this time, for them it was not a dilemma at all. If Caesar said, call me God, people who weren't Christians, I want to save my neck. I'll call you God. I'll bow at your throne. I'll sacrifice at your altar because I want to live. And so those who weren't Christians didn't give this a second thought. Remember in Daniel's day, when Nebuchadnezzar made the great image of gold and said, when these musical instruments sound, everybody bow down to it, or else you're going to die by fire. Everybody bowed down, correct, except for three: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. At this particular time, everybody's bowing to Rome except, John says, those whose names are written in the book of life. Those worship the empire if their names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The phrase book of life is found, I think, 8 times in the New Testament, once in Philippians 4, and the other times are in Revelation chapter 7. It's not that God can't remember everybody and has to write down their names lest he forget. This is for our understanding. But it's the idea that if I'm a child of God, God knows me. And it helps me to know that he knows my name. My name is written in heaven. And that's an encouraging thing. So those who were not Christians would bow to Augustus and Caesar and Nero and Domitian, setting himself up as God. Statues were erected to honor the emperor, and you were to look upon that statue as deity itself and bow to that. Christians would not, and that's the reason for their persecution. Verse 9, we've heard this before, haven't we? Way back in chapters 2 and 3 at the end of each letter. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with a sword must be killed with the sword. Or to paraphrase, if you dish it out, it's going to be dished right back to you. The Lord said, what did he say? They who take the sword will perish with the sword. It's going to come back to you. So Rome led people into captivity. Rome killed people with a sword. God's saying, I'm going to see to it comes right back to Rome. They'll be conquered. They'll be captive. They'll be put to death with the sword. In the meantime, Christian, you be patient. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. We know the difficult thing was when these Christians heard these words, God's retribution against Rome didn't happen that day. It didn't happen the next day or the next week, month, year. It would take, 400 years for this to finally come to pass. And so the difficult thing was for you to maintain your faith in God's promise. We want God's promises to be answered the day He makes them, correct? God promised Abraham, you're going to have descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven. Well, it took centuries for that to happen. But Abraham believed the promise. So if I'm a Christian in the first century, or for that matter, I need to have faith in God's promises and be patient for God to keep His promises, which He does. Rome is going to reap what she has sown. Now verse 11. So that's the beast coming up out of the sea. Verses 11 through 18, the beast from the earth. John says, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. Not standing on the seaside now, but looking in another direction. And this beast is a bit different than the first. I mean, it doesn't look nearly as bad, does it? The first beast had, 7 heads and 10 horns. This particular beast has 2 horns like a lamb. Now, you can walk up to a lamb, pat him on the head, right? You can throw him to the ground. He'll just roll on the ground and play. Lamb is a gentle, for the most part, a gentle creature. Here is a beast that is deceptive. He's a beast, but sort of looks like a lamb, meek and mild. Again, deceptive. He spake as a dragon, or as the devil. The devil is the father of all lies. So we have the deception here. Verse 12, this beast exercised all the power of the first beast before him. We know how bad the first one was. This is just as bad a beast, but doesn't look nearly as bad. Fools a lot of folks, the idea. Causes the earth and them who dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. Many believe this to have been the priesthood of the emperors who guided worship of the emperor and enforced worship of the emperor. In chapter 19, this beast will be called the false prophet. So if the first beast is the Roman Empire, and the second beast then would be this priesthood, this deceptive religious power, who duped people into worshiping the emperor. Whether it be a promise of money, robbery, it's not so bad. You'll feel good when you do. Nothing bad's going to happen. And you could just hear the dragon speaking with a smooth tongue to really, again, dupe a lot of people. We know, of course, today the devil has false prophets. And they don't wear a name tag saying, I'm a false prophet. And many of them have a silver tongue. They speak smoothly. They're very deceptive. And people are bilked out of their money. And a lot of them lose their souls in the process. They talk about love, love, and love. And they'll love people straight to hell if people don't wake up and realize who and what they are. That's the deceptive nature of the devil. You know, artist renditions of the devil. He's got a red suit, got a pitchfork, horns on his head, whatever. If he looked like that, well, we'd all resist him. Wouldn't be any problem. He doesn't look like that, doesn't act like that. He's deceptive. And so it is with this second beast. Notice verses 13 through 15. Many believe that this would be the deceptive powers, trickery that these could use to make people think that they were some type of great source of miraculous power. He does great wonders, so he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of these miracles, deceptive, which he had the power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them who dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. Notice he had power to give life to the image of the beast. What do we call it when a man has a large doll on his lap and he's before a crowd? He makes the doll speak. What do we call that? Ventriloquism, right? Good. I mean, if you look, unless you look very closely, it looks as if that doll is talking, doesn't it? A lot of folks believe this may be what this is referring to here. 15, giving life to an image, well, making the image of the beast appear alive is the idea. That the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. If you don't bow to Caesar's image, you're to be put to death. And again, you may remember in the days of Moses, when Moses started performing those plagues against the Egyptians, who else also did? Pharaoh's magicians, right? Moses turned the water into blood. They did the same thing. Moses caused all the frogs to come up. Well, Pharaoh's magicians did the same thing. Probably, we won't get into all that, probably through trickery and deception and so forth. But in any event, these had deceived a lot of folks into believing we need to worship Caesar and his images. And if we don't, we die. Again, that's the end of verse 15. Those who would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And so the Christian had to decide, am I going to save my neck or am I going to save my soul? And thousands upon thousands lost their lives because of this. People reading this, they were wondering, do we keep the faith? Do we persevere? That's why Revelation was written to them. Keep the faith, persevere, God's going to conquer in the end. And now for the three favorite verses, 16 through 18. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Or as we would say, what? 60 is 60, correct? 666. All right? And so here was pressure put on people, and we would call this economic pressure on those who would not worship the beast. You may remember, well, I remember in reading that the Nazis in Germany, when they came upon a Jewish store, what did they do? They put tape across it. They put an X across it. Do not shop with these people. Why? They're Jews. That's the only reason given. Do not shop because they're Jews. We're not saying the Nazis were what we're talking about here, but we are saying there was economic pressure put on people, and that's what evidently what Rome is doing now to anybody who would not kowtow to Rome. Then you had a lot of problems. You either faced death or you faced economic starvation or things of that nature. I don't take the mark to be literal any more than we've already talked about Jesus, putting his name on the foreheads of people, just simply signifying that God knows those who are his, and now the Roman emperor wants to know those who are his. Some believe that if you worship the emperor, you were given a certificate. And so to go into a store and buy and sell, you had to present the certificate in order to trade. And if you didn't have the certificate, and as a child of God, you would not have the certificate because you didn't bow to Caesar, then you had a tough way of it. So, the question, of course, is, who is this 666? And a lot of people look upon that number in a very superstitious way, correct? Much like a black cat crossing the road, walking under a ladder. What other number is superstitious? 13. Break a mirror. What happens if you break a mirror? 7 years bad luck or something like that. Some people look upon 666. There was a girl who went through a drive-through, and her order came up to $6.66. She made the people on the inside add to her order. She was not going to pay $6.66. In our area a few years ago, there was a fellow who had one of those trucks where you got to get a ladder to get up into it. You know what I'm talking about? On the side of his truck, he had the beast. Guess what his license plate said? 666. And, I think everybody sort of braked. You don't want to run into the beast. Well, again, I wish people would get as excited about baptism and Bible study and worship and so forth as they do about getting wrapped up about the mark of the beast. And here are a few suggestions, and a lot of this is outlandish. We know that those who believe in premillennialism say the beast hasn't come yet. We're still waiting on the beast. He is actually going to be a leader of the European community during the 7 years after the rapture, called the tribulation. Yeah, but those faithful are going to be raptured by the Lord. Those unfortunate people left behind, not raptured, well, there's going to be a time of tribulation, and this great beast, the Antichrist, is going to rise up and all of that. Why tell those people in John's day about somebody who hadn't even come yet 2,000 years later? These people were struggling just to live, so why tell them about something that hadn't happened yet? Makes no sense whatever. You may or may not know the name Ellen G. White. She's the founder of Seventh-day Adventism. Seventh-day Adventists say the mark of the beast are people who worship God on Sunday. That's me and you, folks. Well, where would she get something like that? Well, she dreamed it. That's where the whole Seventh-day Adventist religion comes from, her dreams. Well, I have dreams too, but I don't make a religion out of my dreams. It's not the Bible. Most believe that these numbers 666 are a code or symbolic language. They used in the first century, they used letters to double as numbers. Much like the clock on the wall. At the back, what do we have for the number 12 on that clock? You can turn around and look. XII. What does that stand for? 12. Do they teach Roman numerals anymore in schools? I don't know if they do or not. We were taught Roman numerals. You know, the CM, the MC, and all of that, and I've forgotten it now, but we were taught Roman numerals. Letters stood for numbers and still do in some cases. And so some believe each of these three numbers stand for letters, and you can factor out the name, and all sorts of names have been given through the years. Alexander Campbell took the position that the Pope of Rome was who John's talking about here. My problem with that is what? Why tell them about the Pope of Rome? He's not going to come around for 600 years. They're trying to live from day to day. It's not going to help them to know about that. Some believe that some of the reformers were the beast. Some felt that Hitler was the beast. Some believe that Ronald Reagan was the beast. Do you know why? How many letters in the name Ronald? 6. His middle name was Wilson. How many names in Wilson? And how many names in Reagan? 6, 6, 6. Ronald Reagan is the mark of the beast. And these poor folks who come up with that, do they not realize there are tens of thousands of people who have 6 letters in their first name, 6 letters in the middle name, 6 letters in the last name? Joseph Samuel Carter, Elijah Oliver Wilson, Isaiah Adrian Sawyer, Robert Jordan Carson. We may have one here at Verona. She's not here tonight. I wonder what Brenda Oliver's middle name is. If it has 6 letters, well, Brenda Oliver's the mark of the beast. Stay back. We're bordering on stupidity when we come up with things like this. It is just absolutely ludicrous that people come up with this, and people believe it. Bill Gates. Tanya sent me an email back in 1999. Somebody sent her forward this, thinking that Bill Gates III is the mark of the beast. If you take his name and if you decode it in the computer language, you come up with 666 and all this utter nonsense. These folks didn't know Bill Gates or Ronald Reagan or the Pope or anybody like that. Whoever this referred to, they had to understand it. Else, why bother writing them about it? I believe this is simply a symbolic reference to Rome. John's not going to spell it out. I'm talking to you about the Roman Empire, because if Rome got a hold of the letter, it would certainly be curtain sure enough for anybody possessing this letter. And so written in code form to protect them, but to reveal to them who he's talking about, to give them encouragement to maintain the faith. Your enemy is going to meet his match. Application for us: maintain the faith, whatever you're struggling with. Again, people reap what they sow, and again, God's cause will be victorious in the end. Don't lose your faith and remain faithful. We're out of time. Sunday morning, Lord willing, we'll pick up in Revelation chapter 14. Revelation 14.